Okay, I think we'll get started. So thank you, those in attendance, for joining our next webinar in our series of strategies and solutions around CMMC and DFARS NIST 171. My name is Derek White. I am with Beryllium InfoSec Collaborative. I'm one of the equity partners and Director of Business Development. And today we're going to be joined by two special guests from our key collaborator duo, Security. That's going to be Ezra Graziano, who's an account executive for the federal team at Duo, and Brian Rosensteel, who's a U.S. federal sales engineer. And today's topic is going to be specifically around multi-factor authentication, or MFA, and specifically when it comes to securing federal information. So again, just to kind of backtrack a little bit, this is the third, well, technically fourth webinar that we have done specific to small business and defense contractors and how to mature their business so that they can succeed within the CMMC. And we kicked off with Virtru 2 weeks ago. Last week we did Nectar Labs. This week we're going to be with Duo, and next week we're going to kind of compile it all together with our partner Point North Networks. So thank you again for joining. This will be recorded. You will get a copy of the recording tomorrow, and you will also find the past webinars and future webinars will be on our website and our YouTube channel, so you can view them at any time. Highly encouraged for question and answers throughout this presentation that you use the Q&A tab on the bottom. I think it's at the bottom or top of your screen versus the chat function. So please use the Q&A, and we will answer those at the end or maybe even during if they are applicable. So please do that, and we'll go from there. So that's it for housekeeping. I'm going to pass the mic over to Ezra and Brian, and take it away, gentlemen.
Hey, thanks so much, Derek, for having us and hosting, and appreciate putting this together. It was a great time on the solutions panel with the partner set, and I'm glad to be able to continue the series as well. So much obliged there, and thanks for having us. For those on the call that may not be kind of familiar with why the partnership exists, I think it'd be good to kind of set the foundation as to why we're working together in this space specifically. And what's really nice here is that Duo, being the MFA component, works really well with for the defense industry base when there's a very significant kind of emphasis on multi-factor and protecting CUI applications, and Beryllium and CUICK does a great job of having a secure enclave that is segmented specifically for these types of applications. So, and we'll dig into that a little bit later on the webcast, I'd just like to kind of lay that foundation as to why we like to work together, and why it's we feel there's a lot of value there in supporting contractors and in the requirements when it comes to 171 and in the CMMC landscape as well. So next slide, please. So today we've done our introductions. We're going to talk a little bit about why Duo and what the kind of strategy is there for meeting the 171 requirements. We have Brian on the call as well, who will run through a demo for us as well to show the user experience and dig into some of the components there. Then we'll talk a little bit, as I mentioned, kind of on the Duo CUICK components, and then we'll have some time for Q&A as well. So next slide, please. So from the Duo perspective, we're really looking at the zero trust kind of atmosphere, right? And this is where we fit in the landscape of modern networks and approach. And Duo's done a fantastic job, and as far as setting us up to work in these environments when it comes to really supporting compliance efforts when around the 171 requirements. So Duo has achieved a FedRAMP status. It's a moderate authorization with GSA PMO office that requires DUO to meet around 325 controls, right? That meets all the 853 requirements and some additionally. So we have offerings that are ultimately pre-approved authenticators that are available to be used and deployed and implemented to help our agency and mission partners meet these requirements for MFA. So there's a number of things that are included with that, and we'll be diving into the kind of more specifics there. You know, part of the great feature sets here is having when the div is out looking for which type of authentication methods to use, that there are resources that have pre-approved authenticators that meet the digital identity guidelines. And that's a very kind of key component that takes the burden off integrators to really make sure those checks are in place, right? Because we've done all that work ahead of time and made that happen. So the service is available there for when looking at types of authenticators to use, and we'll dig into that as we move along as well. So the other nice thing is that we have built-in encryption as well, right? And that's baked right into the product. It's not an enabled mode at all. It exists from an end-to-end perspective in using the DUO system. So, you know, it's again positioned the product well to really protect CUI applications. So once those determinations are made as to where CUI sits or FCI in either kind of local network access or if it's privileged account access, there's resources available to make sure that you can identify who the users are and how they're accessing those systems and network access. So DUO will be more or less instrumental for a lot of implementation to cover a number of domains. We'll hit about 8 different domains of CMMC across pretty much every level, 1 through 5 out there. So I'm going to spend a little less time on kind of the specific domain levels there. So, you know, as far as there's a lot of them, right? And I'm happy to kind of take that more offline as to what that looks like and from a specific kind of implementation standard. But anything pretty much that calls out for MFA and meeting the 801 to 71 requirements will be a good fit for a DUO service to come in and help check those boxes. Next slide, please. So there's a couple ways to utilize DUO functionality, and we have a couple additions available to be able to leverage, and you know, there's some differences there, and we can talk about those, and we'll address those as the webcast continues. And I wanted to call out as well just kind of what's built in and you know, for meeting the different types of federal compliance that is required. So next slide, please. So from a more specific level, there's a number of authentication methods that DUO will help meet in the digital identity guidelines. And we really fit in that AAL2 and AAL3 standard that's built right in. So if you're utilizing our DUO push, which is leveraging the DUO mobile app as an authentication method, you can meet the AAL2 standards right with the service itself. So there's other options that you can utilize as far as the DUO mobile passcode, which is more or less a soft token that also meets these requirements for AAL2 standards. And then it can be up-leveled, right? The call out is that there's for AAL3 standards to leverage a cryptographic key, and such as a YubiKey, which is a U2F type of security key that we also partner with. So those are ways that you can meet even in higher levels of authentication, leveraging the Duo service with cryptographic keys as well. And then Touch ID is also available in our FedRAMP product as well to meet AL2 standards. And then there are hardware token options as well, which are HOTP integrations that Duo does not necessarily manufacture, but we partner with a number of different types of tokens out there that can be leveraged where hardware tokens will be required, such as a SCIF. Next slide, please. So I wanted to call, I get a lot of questions on this, just from kind of what our FIPS logical view looks like. So I wanted to kind of display this as part of our compliance efforts and how we decided to build that out. As far as kind of where that encryption stands, so when I say end-to-end encryption in the Duo service, it'll occur in 3 places: on the mobile app, on the user's device. It'll occur on the Duo servers, as well as the authentication proxies. So it really has a flow of making sure that we're encrypted all the way through that authentication process. Next slide, please. So I want to point out kind of what's changed, right? So MFA is not new. It's been around for decades at this point. In fact, the federal government is one of the first adopters of multi-factor in PKI and using methods for ensuring user identities. So the difference is that the landscape's changed, right? So is the technology is advanced and there's more available cloud services. The idea is that the perimeter is no longer between 4 walls, right? It's now where there's access decisions being made. So anywhere there's an access point to an application, or where there's an access decision occurring, that is more or less the new perimeter. So it's really redefined how to protect a network in a very much more agile, remote work, telework environment. So service, the capabilities to deploy services in order to protect those applications in a more a larger scale, as far as where your users are, if they're accessing from home, at the office, if they're traveling, having a service to be able to enable users really to access from any location has been more or less critical, as far as what that looks like just from a general business kind of flow. So you're not kind of bogging down your users, more or less, that they have an easy way to get in from really anywhere that they would need to work. So that's really been Duo's more or less ability to kind of be effective and efficient into supporting users, and the whole part of the philosophy behind that is making it easy to use too, right? So we don't want to burden users more or less with a complicated way of securing themselves. The whole foundation of Duo is to make it easy and effective and enable users to engage them in the security process and get involved. So when we look at the perimeter itself and seeing how that's changed, it presented a challenge ultimately in security itself, and how do we support that? So with Duo being a cloud service, and being able to deploy at that application level is able to protect your perimeter in a number of different ways as well. So next slide, please. So when we talk about the perimeter changing, it really leads into this zero trust kind of philosophy, as far as making sure that we know who the users are, what the devices are, and then allowing the access based on those policy features. So there's a number of kind of foundational building blocks that builds upon, and throughout that we're able to really make good determinations and allow access based on that. So let's dive into these in a little bit more specificity. Next slide, please. So when it comes to confirming user identities, and I alluded to kind of early, is that there's a number of authentication methods that can be leveraged in order to do this, so we have whether it's the mobile app and passcodes. It's really been important for Duo to be able to support a number of authentication methods because there's an understanding that it's not a one-size-fits-all environment. So it was really critical for us to be able to support a number of methods that, depending on what users are, if you have corporate-owned, personally owned devices that are accessing, if you need YubiKeys for either strong authentication standards or convenience, or if you're in a SCIF and need an HOTP token, that you can use these methods to confirm that user's identity with that strong authentication point, right? So Duo only comes in after that primary credential has been accepted to challenge that user with a strong authentication method in order to verify their identity against that primary auth source. So once that's been complete, next slide, please. We're able to do a number of things kind of on top of that. So once that second factor is accepted and completed, Duo is going to do a number of things, and kind of that next building block that we talked about is visibility into the devices themselves, right? So through hooks into the mobile app and the browser, we're able to make a determination as to what that device is operating with, right? So we can begin to set policies based on potential risks associated with those devices. We have a number of customers that will deploy Duo, and then through our device insights, be able to determine that they have more devices attempting to access their networks and accessing their networks than they initially thought, right? So that goes beyond corporate-owned devices. So when a user's out there on their personal device, or they're at home, they want to check their email, there's an understanding that there's far more devices accessing their network than they initially thought. So with that visibility component, in being able to make those determinations, we're then able to kind of set policies around that, so we can really make sure that we only allow access based on authorized users. Next slide, please. So the next part of that, and that third building block, comes down to the device security itself, and understanding kind of more beyond just that software component, in making sure that the device itself is have enabled screen lock and biometrics, which are kind of a key component in there in helping verify identities there. It continues to add on the fact that, hey, not only do we understand what the device looks like, but let's set that security around it and make sure that we have a number of measures in place to make sure that we're not compromising application access. Next slide, please. So that fourth block comes down to more contextual policy, and that's really taking a look at who your users are and what type of access they need, and Duo is able to make those determinations based on either user groups. So if you have privileged access users that only need certain access to applications, that those policies can also be enabled in order to provide that context around who the users are and what they need to access. Next slide, please. And that final kind of building block to Zero Trust, it becomes to the fact that it needs to secure all applications, right? So the idea is that it begins to standardize authentication across the enterprise. So it's more or less, hey, being able to secure just cloud resources and on-prem resources. A true zero trust ability would have the access in order to secure a number of applications, whether they're cloud, on-prem, or mobile. So that really kind of takes the next level as to saying like, hey, if those applications are not within our local networks and we have some cloud resources, making sure that to have MFA across the board really puts it into the zero trust architecture there. Next slide, please. So I also get kind of a lot of questions on more of the logical view and what it looks like, kind of where it sits in the workflow, and this is something we'll dig in a little bit more to. And I'm watching the clock too, so I don't bore everyone too much, but as we do have kind of a demo queued up. You know, ultimately, Duo becomes that relationship between the users, the devices, and the application. So it becomes that conversation where we're going to sit in the middle, and Duo's done a great job at being able to tie those three things together when it comes to connecting a subset of users, depending on kind of where they fit in the corporate structure, if they're their staff, or if you have contractors that need access, that they can also use Duo, and you can feel comfortable understanding who they are before they get access. So it's a good kind of overhead view as to where we fit in the overall infrastructure. Next slide, please. And I wanted to highlight a couple use cases I've been seeing a lot as far as my work with the defense industry base and some of the very common use cases here. I'd say about 70% of the companies in the div that I've been speaking with have these RDP use cases and for workstation logon access. So I wanted to highlight this one specifically as it comes to taking a look at where we'll fit in that workflow and having the ability to not only do online RDP authentication, but offline as well, which allows you to have options when it comes to authenticating your users in different types of environments, whether they're traveling on a plane or working in a skiff. There's options to be able to support that, even with a cloud service. Next slide, please. The other one I have see a lot of is for VPN. And it's a very, very common integration that we work as far as kind of whatever VPN you're using and being able to authenticate that user prior to logging into the VPN itself. So I just wanted to highlight that as far as a very regular use case that we're seeing and something that may be applicable to people on this cast as well. Next slide, please. The other one is single sign-on, which is a great use case as well, because this really becomes the aggregator as far as being able to tie in all the applications that you would prefer to put authentication in front of, and you know what I've been seeing is once those CUI applications have been identified, aggregating that into a single sign-on. That way, it's easy building out the or easier per se when building out the SSP to point the fact that hey, any CUI that's being stored or transmitted is in one single location, and we have authentication based on those requirements as well. So the other nice thing about Duo is that while we offer a single sign-on, which is called the Duo Access Gateway, we also integrate with a number of single sign-ons out there. So if there's one that you prefer or you're already using, then we're pretty agnostic as to those integration standards. Next slide, please. So to kind of sum up, we're Duo's become this modern approach towards security, and the true value there is really having a kind of easy to deploy, manage, and administer authentication platform, right? So it's giving you not only the compliance standards for federal use cases, but doing it in a way that's frictionless, and allows you to have options as well for different kind of types of access that's necessary. So with that, next slide, please. Oh, okay, one too far. We'll get to that one. I think so right now I've talked a lot, and I will pass the mic to Brian, and we'll show you what it looks like.
Yeah, thank you. So go ahead and exit out of this for right now, and we're going to go over to this website here so we can kind of show you kind of the user experience. By the way, this site is demo.duo.com. This is public facing. This is something that really any of you can go and play around with. And let me break down this website to you so you kind of understand how the demos kind of happen through this website and with Duo. So we have kind of at the top level here, you know, concepts. Hey, you want to see what it's like going through a single sign-on? You want to see what the process is like using our mobile push authenticator, which is, you know, as Ezra said, an AAL2 validated authenticator that's in our FedRAMP moderate environment, and something that has a lot of user adoption, and a lot of users say that this is the authenticator of choice for them. But we can also go and you can check out some other ones. Hey, let's take a look at that AnyConnect client and what that looks like, or a Windows logon event. You know, if you want to be protecting, let's say, a local administrator account and you want to have multi-factor authentication with it. And we'll show you what that walkthrough looks like here in just a moment. But we also allow you to actually leverage your mobile device and try some of these integrations yourself. So you're going to be able to go in and actually check out that AnyConnect or ASA integration and use your phone as a part of it. And I'll show you the steps that are required to do that as well, if you want to go ahead and kind of kick the tires on this yourself without having to worry about going through and setting up a trial version, setting up the connections. If you just want to see, hey, what's it like truly for a user to go through and do the enrollment, you know, this is that type of demo where you can do that in a very non-committal fashion. Okay, so let's go in and actually show what it's like to go through a single sign-on portal. So that's here at the top of our page. We'll click on the SSO demo. And the way that these kind of top demos in this site work is you get kind of a mock workstation, and you just go through the same steps that a user would go through. So in this case, we're trying to get into this Acme application here. I'm going to go in and click to where I put in my username, and the demo just auto-populates it for us, and we can click login. Now, at this point, we get to really kind of the heart of our authentication engine. So a lot of what Ezra was talking to you about and that zero trust capability and those building blocks, most of that's going to happen for your users transparently and behind the scenes. So at this point, the user can choose a couple different authenticators. We have some here that are available in our commercial edition. Again, this demo is kind of built for our commercial side. It works well in our federal environment as well. In federal, you won't see this ability to have them call you, but you'll still see the ability of using like an OTP passcode, or being able to use a push authentication. Or if you want to step it up to, you know, an AAL3 authenticator with a UV key, you know, we kind of give you what that looks like for a user by being able to click and authenticate here on the side. You'll also see here that we have the, you know, we kind of show what it's like if you have multiple devices registered. So, you know, we're going to stick with just our phone for this one, but this is a way, think about it, if we have a local administrator account that is shared, as we often do in these environments, you know, this is a way that we can still have multi-factor assigned to each admin, even though they all may be sharing a username and password. Or as a user, I may have multiple mobile devices to which I want to have enrolled. Okay, so let's actually go through and show what it looks like. We're going to go ahead and we're going to click send me a push. And at this point, our mobile device kind of gets a push notification to it. We can see this login request. Click on that notification, and we get my two favorite buttons: a big green approve button and a red deny button. And of course, if this shows up on your phone and you're not trying to do a login, then you can click on deny and say, oh yeah, no, this doesn't seem right. Something's fraudulent about this, or whoops, I'm not actually trying to log in. I accidentally clicked it. It was a mistake. And the user can back out without actually authenticating in. But what's nice is you can kick off. We see this kind of as a CDM aspect too, right? And we have Duo is in phase 2 of CDM with DHS. If you're familiar with that initiative, this is one of the ways that we can bring in CDM. We do some things in the back end as well to make that integration and processes easier for you. But in our case, we are trying to log in. We're going to go ahead and click approve. We can see that we have a couple pieces of information here presented to the user as well, so they know what they're trying to approve and authenticate. And now we're able to get into our single sign-on portal. And from here, we can go ahead and we can click and get into a couple different things, right? If I want to get into AWS, I can click and have that single sign-on into it. By the way, we do not necessarily need to have it where everything's a pass-through. We can configure it so that, if I were to go in to this AWS authentication, I can have it where it would require me to authenticate a second time. You may have a resource that you say, we just don't want to enable pass-through single sign-on authentication. We really want to make sure that we are prompting for multi-factor with every access attempt. You have that ability, but oftentimes people say, yeah, just getting into that gateway and being able to get into your suite of applications, that initial authentication that we went through is enough protection. So now, during this authentication, I kind of talked about how there was a lot going on behind the scenes, transparent to the user. I didn't really explain it. So let's go into another one of our demos, and we can actually take a look at what is going on behind the scenes and what we mean by those zero trust policies and really being an authentication engine. So I'm going to come down here, and I'm going to go into our self-remediation demo. And what this is going to do, this is a similar thing. User in this case is trying to get into Outlook, could be an Office 365 environment, could be the FIPS client, could be OWA. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to try to sign in. Put in my username and password, and immediately I'm presented with this notice here. It says, hey, your browser is 20 days out of date. What is going on? How are we able to get this information? And what is the kind of zero trust component of this, and why we talk about doing a smarter authentication and how Duo can bring you down that pathway? Well, when we think of identity, identity is really 3 parts. It's kind of what I call the trinity of identity. The first part is the account that you're using to request access to the protected resource, right? So in this case, it was the account that we are trying to log into to gain access to our email. But that account could be a couple different things, right? It could be a privileged account. So we can have an administrator trying to authenticate into a resource and do some administrative functions. We may want to have different policies for our more privileged user accounts than we would for a non-privileged account. And so we want to make sure that we have ways of engaging policy at that kind of account level, that who you are part of your identity. But there's more to identity than just that single piece. A second piece actually comes into the device that you're using to request access. So in our case here, we can see that our browser is out of date. So, hey, I might be an authorized user into this resource, and I may even have a strong authenticator that is trusted that I can use to get in. But if I'm coming in from a workstation that doesn't have a device health posture that is consistent with my security goals for my organization or my specific protected resource, then I may not want to allow that user to come through. Moreover, I may say, hey, your admin account needs to be having software at a specific level. We might allow a user to have their browser be a little farther out of date, but because you're coming in with a more privileged user, we're going to have a different set of policies that make sure that you're coming in with a higher level of trust in that device, right? And I've talked a lot about browser. This extends to your operating system. This extends to patches for that operating system. Obviously extends to the version of the browser that you're using. It also extends to the browser itself. Are you coming in from an unknown browser? Maybe we don't necessarily want to grant access. Maybe we want to restrict it to just Chrome or Firefox. You know, maybe we don't want Internet Explorer coming in. We can also look at things like, hey, do you have Flash? Do you have Java installed? What versions are those? Do we want you to allow you to come in from a workstation with those particular plugins enabled and installed? And we can make policies based on that. And the best part of all of this is we can do it without installing an agent on that end workstation. So it's a way for you to have insight into the device health of those workstations coming into your perimeter without having to worry about deploying software across all of those endpoints. And so the last part about this is so we have our identity, right? We have who the user is, the account they're using. We have the device that they're requesting access from. And our third piece of our identity is the actual multi-factor authenticator itself. But we need to think about the multi-factor authenticator from a modern viewpoint. So what I mean by this is we need to think beyond proof of possession. So in the past, the last 10 years, really, when I look back at multi-factor authentication, it's always been built around having a smart authenticator that can prove that you have possession of it, right? We can think of the ultimate authenticator being the smart card. And actually, you have to have that PIN in order to be able to unlock the use of that private key, and that asserts proof of possession of an authorized user of that smart card for that authentication. And that's great, but it doesn't give you any insight to the device that's housing that authenticator. And it's that latter point that is that modern look at a multi-factor authenticator where everything is going to be shifting towards in the next 10 years, right? So we're already making sure that we're looking at the account that the user is using from. Is it a privileged account? Let's enact certain policies. Hey, what workstation are they coming from? Okay, let's make sure that we have it at a certain device health. Now, the user is using a multi-factor authenticator. In this case, we're using a push authenticator on a mobile device. What is the device health of this mobile device, and should we trust it? So I might have a workstation that's in, up to my security standard. Now I might be an authorized user, and I might have an authorized multi-factor authenticator. But if my device is rooted, if I'm not using screen lock, if I'm on Android and I don't have encryption enabled, right? These various security postures, and there's a few others as well that we can check on a mobile device. If those aren't up to par for our security needs, then we may not want to allow you to leverage this authenticator. And we may say, I'm sorry, you need to make sure that you turn on screen lock. You need to make sure that you have your encryption turned on for your mobile device before we're going to allow you to use this device to assert your identity. But in our case, our mobile device checks out. But as you remember, our browser is out of date. And here we're telling our user, look, everything's checking out, but the browser you're using to request access is out of date and you need to be on the latest version. You're currently 20 days out of date. So it's informing the user what's going on. And then we also, if you want to enable it, you can point the users in how to update. In this case, when we click on it, it's going to take us over to Mozilla's webpage and show you, hey, this is where you can update Firefox. Of course, in this example, we're coming through from Chrome. So, it wants you to download Firefox, but you get the idea here where we can reduce help desk calls by enabling users the ability of understanding why their authentication request is being denied and ways that they can mitigate it. And if they can't mitigate it, they have a better amount of information when they call that help desk, when they call that administrator and say, hey, I can't come in for this reason. Can you help with that? And it really reduces that process of discovery. So that's one of the benefits of going at things from a zero trust perspective. I always like to kind of end this part of the demo with an explanation of how these features in action can be of great value for you. Because oftentimes people say, oh, well, this may only apply to BYOD. I manage my own devices. I don't need to be doing these checks. And hey, if you're doing checks a certain way, you may not need to. But the example that I always like to give of even managed endpoints where you may want to have these smarter authentication policies is Cisco itself, right? So Duo is a part of Cisco. When you look at Cisco, it's about 120,000 users. So that includes our partners and our contractors. It is over 3,000 applications that we have in our current perimeter. And that goes across 400,000 devices that are accessing, you know, these various applications. Some of those are managed, some of those aren't managed, but that's a lot of devices. So how can being able to check in a smarter authentication kind of device health really impact an organization at that level? Well, I point back to about a year ago. There was a vulnerability in Chrome. It's a little more than a year ago now, about a year and a half. An audio component in Chrome allowed for arbitrary code execution. So it was a pretty significant vulnerability. It was significant enough that Google said, hey, the moment that that patch came out, this is mandatory. Everyone should be upgrading right away because this, you know, vulnerability is pretty significant. So imagine if you have to ensure that 400,000 endpoints for Cisco all are using the latest version of Chrome, and that, you know, all 3,000 applications could be vulnerable, you know, across 120,000 users. That is an administrative nightmare. You might say, well, I can deploy over SCCM. And that can happen, but, you know, to make sure that that works, that might take 24 hours, it might take 48 hours. And you always have that look back of, oh, it didn't get deployed to these workstations because they were turned off. You can think about how that traditionally is handled. However, Cisco was able to do it in less than an hour. And the reason for that is we're able to go into the Duo backend administrative interface and go in and put a global policy that says Chrome is mandatory to be on the latest version. And that was it. Once that was applied, that policy was enforced across all of our applications, so that every single one of our endpoints trying to get into that application, if it wasn't on the latest version of Chrome, our users got a notification like this saying your Chrome's out of date. We're not going to allow you in until you have the latest version. And that's how we were able to mitigate that pretty significant exploit. And that's the kind of power that Zero Trust can bring into a smarter authentication workflow. So the last part that I promised from a demo perspective, and then we'll turn it over to Q&A, is what it looks like if you want to actually have part of it being with your mobile device. And so with that, we kind of, you know, encourage you to come down to the bottom of this demo.duo.com website. In this case, I'll click on the Cisco. And what we require here is you to put in a username. So as long as I put in a email address, then it's going to prompt me through a self-service. So in this case, I put in an email address that's not in the system. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to even be a valid email address if you want to put in one that wasn't a valid address. And then you can go through and actually say, yep, protect your Duo account. It's just as easy as saying, start my setup. Hey, I want to use my mobile device. It's what we recommend for this demo. And then it'll be going through here. You put in your phone number, which I'm not going to put in on this demo. You would click continue. It'll give you a QR code that you can scan, and you can scan it and be able to go through. So that's a way for you to go through our enrollment without having to worry about setting up a trial version of Duo and going through that. So it's another powerful feature within, you know, our public-facing kind of demo site for you to play with. So, okay, I want to pause here, kind of give it back to Ezra. I think we might have one or two more slides to finish up, and regardless, go through some Q&A and some questions that you may have.
That's great. Thank you so much, Brian. I know we did have a slide, and I think we want to emphasize a little bit on the Brilliant workflow. Derek, do you want to handle that one?
Yes, I will. Sorry about that. I was just trying to get the mouse back there. So, yeah, so gentlemen, thank you. That was obviously a very deep dive technical. The whole point of this webinar is to talk at length about not just the importance of multi-factor authentication, but how Duo does it, and it provides a lot of creativity and a lot of just simplistic ways for businesses to tackle this. And so that transitions into the constant that you have heard over the last couple webinars, is why we, Beryllium and the CUICK solution have gone with Duo as that portion of the pie of NIST 171 and CMMC, is because it really is a great platform. It is a great way to authenticate those users that need to access this information, specifically controlled and classified information, and those who do not. So it's a no-brainer from a security perspective, and it's absolutely something that is just going to continuously be more and more important as we go down the journey of securing our supply chain of the DoD. So real quickly, the slide here, we're going to have a way more deeper dive into what the CUICK solution is capable of. I did a little bit of that last week. We're going to do that next week with our partner Point North Network. So look for that webinar next Wednesday. But simplistic, as we get this question a lot, what does it look like within CUICK? Well, on the left, it's simple. CUICK is a remote desktop, secure virtual environment that meets the technical specs of NIST 171. Of course, there's non-technical stuff that goes along with it as well, but part of it is MFA. So you establish the VPN, as you can see on the left, and I know we talked a lot about the push to the phone, but there's other ways to do it, but typically around a push to a phone, that's what it looks like. This is an actual screenshot. It says, hey, is this you? And as Brian pointed out, if it is green, great. If not, red, deny. That's a really big step. So once you are authenticated, then you are into a virtual desktop and able to send, receive, store, and work within CUI and keep it off of your network. So that's what we're talking about more next week. And for this, we're going to shift over to some Q&A. So again, thank you for getting into the weeds on this stuff, guys. It's a good topic and a very, very important one. So with Q&A, I've got a couple questions that I'm going to tee up here because they have come in and we get these a lot. And so either Ezra or Brian, it doesn't matter who answers these, but one that we get a lot is, not even just within a CUICK solution customer, but really anybody that we're working with looking to achieve the DFARS 7012 and CMMC implementation. How do you guys do with logs being exported to a SIEM, for example? Can you talk about that for a minute or two?
Sure. Yeah. I'll take a stab at it, and Brian, if you want to add some context, that's great. But ultimately, Duo has APIs that are available, either auth API. We have admin APIs that can connect and export logs to a SIM, whichever one that you choose. We know we're working with Nectar Labs quite a bit as well, which fits really well into the compliance and CMMC efforts as well. So ultimately you can kind of choose which events or logs and send those to the SIM themselves.
Awesome.
Yeah, exactly. And the only thing that I'll add here is, the next question with that will be, oh, well, what's the output file type? So we have JSON, we have CSV, and there's one other one that we support as well. But basically, we support the major formats that most kind of log, be it Splunk or whoever it may be, can actually consume, and that's the way that it can be done. And of course, Ezra talked about it from an API standpoint. It's also something that you can do manually, something you go into our backend admin portal and take a look at. We can have it where you can see certain authentication events very quickly in a nice GUI. It's also something that you can say, oh, I want to export this out manually. And of course, we have our admin APIs that you can actually build a script around and do it in a more automated fashion.
Awesome. Cool. That's a good one. We get this one sometimes too. I'm sure you guys hear this one a lot, but talk about is Duo able to work, say, mobile without a data connection? Someone's in airplane mode, doesn't want to be disturbed, or or traveling or something like that. You can talk about how that would work within a multi-factor?
Yeah, definitely. That's a good one, and it comes up a lot on our end too, because we're a cloud service, right? So it, as far as if someone's on a plane, or SCIF's a very common use case, and for this particular demographic. But the answer is yes. Ultimately, as far as being able to support. For example, if Derek, you showed the mobile app and authenticating into the CUICK TRAC solution, if that mobile device was not connected per se, there's OTP, there's soft tokens ultimately that can be generated in order to authenticate via the mobile app, as well as security keys would be another way as well. Yeah, that's so if there. If you're traveling, you're on an airplane, you don't want to buy two licenses for the airplane Wi-Fi. You could authenticate via offline soft tokens.
Yeah, cool. You mentioned, and then Ezra, you kind of talked briefly about SCIF environments. I mean, I'm sure that comes up all the time when you're talking about that. Same with us, right? Like, we have these really controlled environments where we're not allowed to do certain things. Can you elaborate just a little bit more on some use case scenarios or very topical instances where SCIFs come into play for you guys quite a bit?
Sure. Yeah, and that's a good point, because SCIFs typically wouldn't allow a phone or a USB device, right? So that kind of rules out the ability to bring in a smartphone or a YubiKey for that, for example. But there are a couple ways our customers are utilizing MFA, and the most common one is hardware tokens. So that would be a HOTP, OAuth, 6-digit keychain fob that you can take into the SCIF and authenticate that way. We also have some customers that will leverage the mobile app as well from a soft token perspective, and then write those down and then go to the workstation and log in from there. It's kind of not the most recommended way to do it, but one thing we've seen as well in the SCIF environment.
Yeah, and to explain how that actually works, so there's really two flavors of OTP tokens that are out there. There's what we call a TOTP, or time-based OTP. That's what a lot of us are familiar with, right? Yeah, that number recycles every 30 or 60 seconds, and then it's a new code. And that's what most physical tokens are built around. Our mobile device leverages something called HOTP. I don't know why it's H, but it basically means event-based OTP. So what that means is that the number won't recycle until you've told it to recycle. Now, it kind of, as you open up the mobile app, it may push it forward, but the point there is that it's not something that has a time frame associated with it. So what these users will do is, before they go into that SCIF or that secure environment, this actually works for secure manufacturing as well. That may not necessarily be a SCIF, but like some of our customers are doing like munitions, or in a secure manufacturing floor where any electronic device, even a hardware token, might be something that would be of concern for them for static electricity purposes or what have you. And so what they'll do is that they'll generate these codes in advance, and they can write them down. And so I can generate 1, 2, 5, 10, 20 codes, and as long as I use those in order that they were generated, and that next sequential code will still be valid. Like Ezra said, it's not something that's generally recommended, right? Because if you lose that slip of paper, then someone has a bunch of valid codes. But to invalidate those, it's just as simple as, let's say I set up 20 codes, and after generating the 20 codes, I go ahead and generate a 21st, and I use that 21st code. Those previous 20 are no longer valid. So it's everything based on that sequence. So it's a good way to, hey, I lost that slip of paper. The way that you mitigate that is generate a new code, go ahead and authenticate, and that slip of paper is now completely worthless to any type of adversary or attacker, or just someone who picks up and has no idea why there's some random string of numbers on there. So again, it's something that can work in those secure environments. It's something that you kind of have to make that decision as to whether or not you want to go with the event-based token that you can have off the mobile device. Nice thing with that, you don't have that additional hardware cost. You don't have that additional piece of hardware a user has to carry around, or you can use that time-based token that a lot of us are familiar with, that little key fob that then the user is responsible for making sure that they have possession of at all times in order to work in that SCIF environment. And we've seen both deployed in SCIFs all over the federal government and in secure environments, even outside the federal government, that we'll find in commercial space and in enterprises.
Cool. Yeah, that's I think that's a good point. And so then this next question kind of rolls right into this, but you know, when the CUICK solution, we went out and we figured out, okay, how do we do this for a small business? You know, we chose to take the path, and I've talked about this before in previous webinars, where we want to be able to use what we feel is best for the small business. And Duo was a very natural fit for all the reasons you guys talked about today. The getting between people and applications and in devices is such an important and critical part of controlling scope. And it works and integrates well into a bunch of different scenarios. And that's why it's great for our virtual enclave that we're offering up to small businesses, is that it's really a seamless implementation in minor step in the process, but keeps the information safe. So question we've got here, and I'll answer this one first, but it is really around scope. Like, how do I know who to deploy multi-factor to and who not to? So this is kind of a loaded question, because it really should be for any employee that's accessing a system of information you don't want people to have. That's not your people. And then when it comes to DFARS specifically, scope is a big deal to the CUICK solution in Beryllium, right? It's the information security mindset that if somebody doesn't need access to information because they just don't need that information, don't give it to them. Right, and that's what really helps and what the DoD is really asking to do here is take this controlled and classified information, identify with really good certainty who's handling that within your organization, who needs to send it, who needs to receive it, who needs to move it around internally, and get it off of your network and put it somewhere where you can put better, stronger, more mature security practices around. So when it comes to how multi-factor and Duo works within our CUICK environment, it starts with scope, and that's where we put those users within scope into a separate environment, a separate system where they each get the multi-factor authentication set up through Duo to their account so that they can get into the system, and when they're done, they get out. Simple as that. So rather than deploying a bunch of people here and a bunch of people there, that's a great practice based on, you know, the sensitivity of information and compliance needs and, you know, high level people in the business versus, you know, general users, et cetera. So it's a great question. Multi-factor in our minds is something that should be pretty much on anybody who works within your organization, because we don't want outsiders getting in. Same with some other very good ROI and 101 related security stuff to us. And I think Duo is a great place to start. We actually deploy it and recommend that you deploy it to all people in your business anyway, even if they're not handling controlled and classified information or not a CUICK client, just because it's smarter for your business. And so I think that's a great question, and we can talk more about that offline. If you have, please reach out. You've got Ezra's, you can see Ezra's information there. You can see my information there. Please send us questions and emails if you want further demos from Brian or Ezra or myself in the CUICK side of the world and the Beryllium team. Please do. All the other questions that we have, we can answer afterwards as well, but we're up against the clock. So Ezra, Brian, thank you both for spending time today. I know it's a busy time for everybody. This is a great topic to discuss, and it's got nowhere to go but up as things continue to mature. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Derek. Thanks everyone for joining. Appreciate it.